In 2018, I bought a house to please my boyfriend Alex. We had been dating for 3 years, and he dreamed of us living together. He found a house in a quiet neighborhood, old but charming. I wasn't entirely thrilled, but his enthusiasm infected me, and we moved in. The house was 2 stories with a big garden, its wooden floors creaked, and the wallpaper was peeling. Alex said it had character. I tried to see it his way, but something about the house made me uneasy. On the first night, as we unpacked, I heard a faint whisper. I shrugged it off as the wind. Alex often worked late, and I found myself spending evenings alone. Strange things began to happen, little things that were hard to explain. I'd leave a book on the table, only to find it on the floor later. A door I knew I had closed would suddenly be open. I told Alex, but he just laughed, saying it was normal for an old house. One evening, while reading in the living room, I heard a soft scratching sound coming from the walls. I tried to ignore it, but it grew louder. Following the sound, I entered the dining room and saw faint, almost invisible letters on the wall. Get out. My heart raced. I wiped the wall with a cloth, and the writing disappeared, but a chill ran down my spine. When I tried to talk to Alex about it again, he was dismissive. It's just an old house, it makes noises, he said. I wanted to believe him, but my unease grew stronger with each passing day. One night we had a big fight. Alex stormed out, saying he needed space. Alone in the house, I felt the whispers grow louder, and suddenly I could hear voices speaking in a language I didn't understand, but they sounded angry. I couldn't sleep when a loud bang echoed through the house. I jumped out of bed and ran downstairs. The front door was wide open, even though I was sure I had locked it. I checked the windows. Everything was locked. I returned to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The next day, more writing appeared on the walls. Leave now. The letters were larger and more aggressive. In a panic, I began to pack my things, searching for a way to escape this house. But Alex's phone wouldn't connect. Days turned into weeks, and Alex never came back. I was alone, and the strange phenomena continued. Objects moved on their own, cold spots appeared, and the whispers never ceased. One night, I heard footsteps upstairs. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight and slowly made my way up the stairs. With each step, the air grew colder. At the top, the footsteps stopped. I stood in the dark hallway, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Suddenly, the light flickered, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I screamed and ran downstairs, locking myself in the bedroom. I called a friend, trembling as I recounted everything. She came over and stayed with me that night. In the morning, I realized I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I packed my things and went to stay with my friend. As I drove away, a sense of relief washed over me. But a few weeks later, when I returned for my remaining belongings, the old memories came flooding back. As I walked through the empty rooms, I noticed something on the wall in the living room. The phrase "you can't escape" had returned. I froze, staring at the familiar letters. Something inside me clenched. I hurried to pack, when suddenly my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I'm back. My heart raced. It was Alex. Conflicting emotions washed over me. Fear, hope, confusion. I realized this wasn't the end. We were bound not only by love but by a secret lurking within the walls of that old house. Story number 2. When I turned 12, my family moved to rural Louisiana. My father got a new job, and we left the bustling suburbs for a quieter life in the countryside. I wasn't thrilled about it. Leaving my friends in the familiar world was hard. But my parents assured me it would be a good start. Our new home was an old 2-story wooden house that creaked with every step and groaned under the weight of the wind. It sat on a large plot of land surrounded by thick woods that stretched as far as the eye could see. The nearest neighbor, my dad said, was half a mile down the road. The first few days were calm. We unpacked our things and tried to get used to the heavy silence that seemed to envelop us. At night, the quiet was almost unbearable. No distant hum of traffic or chatter from neighbors, just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional creak of the house. Then strange things began to happen. Our dog, Rusty, always a friendly golden retriever, started acting differently. He became nervous, constantly on edge, sitting by the window and staring into the woods. At night, his deep, mournful barks echoed through the house, waking us all up. At first, my parents thought it was just stress from the new environment, but his behavior only worsened. He refused to go outside, tail tucked between his legs, growling at the slightest noise. One morning, while working on the fence with my dad, a man approached us. He was Nolan, an older man, probably in his 50s, with thinning gray hair and a face that looked like it had seen too much sun. His pale blue eyes were sharp, as if they were always watching. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough like gravel. "You must be the new folks." Dad introduced himself, and Nolan began asking about how we were settling in. But there was something off about him. His words were clipped, as if he were hiding something. When he glanced at me, I felt a chill run down my spine. "Be careful out here, especially in the woods," he warned, and his tone sent a shiver through me. After he left, my dad pulled me aside. "I need you to listen to me, son. Don't go anywhere near that man. You understand?" I nodded, confused. "Why, Dad? He seemed harmless." "There's just something off about him. I don't trust him." From then on, I tried to avoid thinking about Nolan, but the next morning, I saw him again, standing at the edge of our property. "You're brave, sitting out here alone," he said, his voice laced with a threat. "The woods can be dangerous." I swallowed hard. "I'm fine." Nolan tilted his head, his gaze unyielding. "You should listen to your parents. They know what's best," he said before slowly walking away. That night, Rusty barked again, and I couldn't sleep. I felt something lurking in the woods, something that was connected to Nolan's warnings. A few days later, I decided to explore the woods, driven by curiosity. I took Rusty with me. As we ventured deeper, the forest felt alive. Noises surrounded us, and soon I noticed something glinting in the bushes. When I approached, it turned out to be an old, cracked mirror. As I touched it, a cold chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, there was a rustling, and Rusty began barking furiously. I turned to see Nolan standing in the shadows of the trees, his eyes gleaming. "I told you the woods are dangerous," he said, his voice a whisper. I realized I had no choice but to run. We dashed back to the house, my heart racing, fear engulfing me. When I reached home, I locked the doors behind me. I could hear Rusty barking, protective as always. I knew we had to leave this place, but I needed to figure out who Nolan was and what he wanted. That night, while my parents slept, I waited until it was dark and slipped outside with a flashlight. I headed back into the woods, determined to uncover the truth about the shadow lurking there. As I ventured deeper, the wind died down, and the air grew heavy. I sensed I wasn't alone. The forest whispered, and in every sound, I heard Nolan's name. Something moved behind the trees, and I quickly turned. It was Nolan, his face pale in the moonlight. "Do you really think you can run away?" he asked, his voice sounding like the wind. At that moment, I understood that the woods weren't just trees. They held secrets, and Nolan was part of something far more sinister. I turned and ran back, not looking back. When I reached home, I no longer hesitated. We had to leave this place. The next morning, I told my parents everything that had happened, and they agreed. We packed our things and left that ominous place behind, abandoning the old house and the woods. Nolan remained there, while we returned to a familiar world filled with the sounds of cars and laughter from neighbors. But sometimes, when I glance at the woods outside my window, I feel its shadow still lurking among the trees, and I know deep down that the forest will never truly let me go. Story number 3. When Jian and I moved into our new home, I hoped for a fresh start. The old mansion seemed full of history and hidden secrets. We eagerly explored every corner until we stumbled upon a mysterious door at the end of the hallway. It was old, with peeling paint and a warped frame, completely out of place in the otherwise meticulously renovated house. I struggled to open it, and it creaked on rusty hinges, revealing a small, gloomy room. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of mildew and something metallic, like old blood. Jian wrinkled her nose and stepped back. "Strange," she said, covering her mouth with her hand. I couldn't explain why, but the place felt wrong, as if something was hidden here. We tried to forget about the room, but soon strange things began happening in our new house. At first, it was barely noticeable sounds, faint footsteps in the hallway that I dismissed as the old house settling. But over time, the noises grew more distinct and troubling. At night, I often felt someone standing outside our bedroom door. One night, I woke to find Jian sitting up in bed, staring at the hallway with a look of terror on her face. "Did you see it?" she whispered. I nodded, unable to find my voice. We both understood that something was very wrong in our house. The next day, I decided to learn more about it and contacted the previous owners. They were an elderly couple who told me about a sealed-off room. We never mentioned it, because we hoped it wouldn't matter, the husband said, his eyes darting. I felt a chill run down my spine. But when we opened it, strange things started happening. We decided to block it off, hoping that would help. Returning to the house, I realized we had unleashed something dangerous. We decided we had to confront what lurked behind that door. Our hearts raced as we approached it, and I gripped the doorknob, feeling the tightness in my chest. The room was just as cold and dark, but this time there was a shadow standing in the corner, not moving, as if it existed in the dimness. I felt my heart freeze, but a surge of determination rose within me. "You don't belong here," I said, my voice trembling but firm. The figure didn't respond, but I sensed the tension in the air beginning to lift. Gradually, the shadow started to fade, like smoke blown away by the wind. As it disappeared, warmth flooded the room. We left the room, closing the door behind us, feeling the fear dissipate along with the shadow. Now it was our home again, filled with light and life. However, a few days later, I heard a whisper, soft and indistinct, drifting from the hallway. I glanced at Jian, who seemed to sense it too. "What was that?" she asked, and I realized we still had something to face. We didn't run from our fear. Instead, we decided to confront it together once more. We knew shadows lingered in this house, but now we were ready to fight them. Story number 4. My name is Kate, and we just moved into a new house. I've always loved changes, but this move felt special. We left the bustling city and now live in a small town surrounded by forests and fields. I was excited, but at the same time a little scared. At first glance, the house looked ordinary old, with white shutters and a porch that needed painting. But there was something strange about it. When we walked inside, I felt a cold draft, even though all the windows were closed. Mom said it was just a draft, but I knew it was more than that. The next day, while exploring the house, I found an abandoned attic. I climbed the creaky stairs and opened the door. It was dark and dusty inside, but something caught my attention: an old toy. It was a doll with a tattered dress and one broken eye. I picked it up and felt a strange sensation, as if it was looking at me. When I came back downstairs, Mom was already cooking lunch. I showed her the doll, but she just smiled and said it was an old thing. I placed it on the shelf in my room, and from that moment it became my other doll. Soon after, strange things started happening. At night, I heard whispers, as if someone was calling my name. Each time, I would wake up and look at the doll, which always remained on the shelf. One night, I woke up to find the doll on the floor. I thought I must have dropped it in my sleep, but the feeling of unease lingered. The next day, I decided we needed to explore our new town. I went for a walk and met the neighbors. They were friendly, but when I told them about the doll, they exchanged glances and said that a girl had lived in this house long ago. Her name was Mary, and she had gone missing many years ago. The neighbors couldn't explain what had happened to her, but everyone said her spirit lingered in the house. From that day on, I started listening more closely to the whispers. They grew louder, and sometimes I thought I saw a shadow in the corner of the room. I couldn't sleep peacefully anymore. One night, I got up and approached the doll. It was on the floor again, but this time I felt the air around me grow colder. "Mary," I whispered, not knowing what else to say. For a moment, everything froze. Suddenly, I saw the doll sway slightly, and the whisper grew clearer: "Help me." I realized that this doll was not just a toy. Mary wanted me to help her. The next day, I met the neighbors again and decided to learn more about the girl. They told me that Mary loved to play in the attic and often stayed there alone. But then she disappeared, and no one knew what had happened to her. When I got home, I decided I had to help her. I climbed to the attic with the doll in my hands and sat down on the floor. "I'll help you, Mary." "Tell me what happened," I said. Suddenly, the entire attic filled with cold air, and I felt something rush past me. I closed my eyes and images began to flood my mind, Mary playing, and then strangers appearing in the house. I understood that she had gotten into trouble. Gathering all my strength, I opened my eyes and shouted, "I will find you. I promise." From that night on, I left the doll in the attic every night, hoping that Mary could be freed. The whispers grew quieter, and the shadow became less frightening. I knew that our new house was not just a place where we lived. It was a place where we could help Mary find peace. And perhaps, at some point, we would become true friends. Story number 5. In a small town where everyone knew each other, a police officer named Alex decided to change his surroundings and move into an old house on the outskirts. The building looked abandoned, but the price was surprisingly low. Alex thought it was a great chance to start anew. From the very first days in the house, he noticed strange things. At night, he heard rustling sounds, as if someone was moving around the rooms. Sometimes it felt like someone was watching him, but he tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the stress from work. While sorting through things in the attic, Alex found an old photo album. The pictures showed people who once lived in the house. Their faces looked happy, but in some eyes, there was a void. Every evening he became more engrossed in researching the house's history. One night there was a loud knock at the door. It was a neighbor warning him about strange occurrences. "There are legends about this place," he said, looking down. "The previous tenants disappeared." Alex just smiled, but a sense of unease gripped him. The oddities escalated. Every night he woke up feeling as if someone was standing beside him. One time, when he decided to check, he saw a blurred silhouette in the corner of the room. His heart raced, and he dashed to the light. The next day, Alex found an old newspaper clipping about the mysterious disappearance of a family who lived in his house many years ago. They were last seen on Halloween. From that moment, he felt he wasn't alone. On the night before Halloween, as whispers filled the air around the house, Alex decided he couldn't take it anymore. He prepared to leave, but at the exit, he saw the same faces from the album. They were standing in the hallway, looking at him with despair. He realized they didn't want him to leave, they wanted him to stay. The next morning, neighbors found only his belongings and the old album. Since then, the townsfolk tell a new story about the police officer who vanished in a house full of secrets and ghosts. Every year, on the night before Halloween, his silhouette is spotted by the window, as if he is waiting for someone to tell his story. When I first saw our new house, it seemed perfect, cozy, with white walls and a big garden. The neighbors were friendly, and children played in the yard. But something about this place always made me feel uneasy. I couldn't explain why I was drawn to this house, but my wife and I decided it was exactly what we needed. The first night was quiet, but I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old wooden floor sent my heart racing. I tried to convince myself it was just an old house breathing, but when I heard a whisper, seemingly coming from deep within the corridor, panic set in. The next day, I decided to explore the attic. It was a forgotten space filled with dusty boxes, old furniture, and gloomy paintings. In the corner, I noticed a doll dressed in an old-fashioned gown. Its glass eyes seemed alive. I quickly closed the box and went back downstairs, feeling a chill run down my spine. Every night, I heard the same sounds, whispers, and creaks. One evening, I mustered the courage, wrapped myself in a blanket, and went down the dark hallway. Suddenly, the light in one of the rooms flickered, and I saw her, a girl standing by the window. She wore an old dress with long dark hair hiding her face. I froze as she just stared into nothingness. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. She didn't answer, but suddenly turned her head. I saw her face pale, with deep hollows where her eyes should be. My scream shattered the silence, and I ran back to my room. The next day, gripped by fear, I decided to find information about the house. At the local library, I stumbled upon an old newspaper. It told a tragic story. A family had once lived in this house, and their daughter, named Lisa, had disappeared without a trace. Nobody knew what had happened to her. I remembered the doll in the attic, and after thinking it over, decided to return to it. When I opened the box again, the doll lay at the bottom, holding a note in its hands, "Help me," in its hairs. I couldn't leave things as they were. If this girl truly needed help, I had to find out what had happened. I went back to the attic, relying on my nerves. I started digging through the old things and found a small key. The moment I inserted it into the lock of an old chest, the room filled with cold. When the lid opened, I saw something horrifying, blankets covering something deceptively innocent. The chest was filled with old toys, among which was a doll resembling the one I had found earlier. I picked up one of the toys and noticed it was wearing the same dress as the girl. As I touched it, a voice echoed in my mind. "Help me," it repeated. In a panic, I dropped the toy and saw the room grow darker. Shadows began to thicken, and from them emerged mournful figures. I realized these were souls tied to the house. They looked sad and silent, as if searching for salvation. I remembered Lisa and how her soul might not find peace. I began to search the house for answers. In the basement, I found an old photograph of the family, with Lisa in it. Her smile seemed alive, but her eyes expressed an indescribable sorrow. I felt that I could help her. Each night, I returned to that place, trying to communicate with her. From time to time, I caught a glimpse of her ghost. She always stood by the window. I started leaving her letters, asking what had happened and how she had left this world. One day, to my surprise, she replied, "They forgot me." This was not easy. I began gathering information about her family and learned that they had moved away after her disappearance. I went to the cemetery where her body was found. I left flowers on her grave and spoke words of farewell. In that moment, I felt the world around me change. The house stopped feeling oppressive. Since then, the whispers faded and the shadows disappeared. I realized she had finally found peace, and our house became a true home for me and my family. But sometimes, when I look out the window at dusk, I think I see her smile, a shadow from the past that has now become a part of our story.